Bonjour, je m'appelle Diane JANOSEK, Dr. Diane JANOSEK. I'm with Capital Technology University in Washington, D.C. My background is law and policy and technology, so I have law and a PhD together, so that makes an interesting perspective from the United States. So with me is Annita. She is from Italy, and we have different perspectives on a common problem, I should say. So this is Annita. I'll let her introduce herself before I get started.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. My name is Annita SCIACOVELLI. I come from the University of Bari, where I teach international law. I'm a cybersecurity specialist in the University of Tel Aviv, and I am on the advisory board of the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. And I'm happy to be here, obviously.
So the European Agency for Cybersecurity, wow, that's a really important function today. So when Annita and I first met, we decided we were trying to think about a way to kind of look to this fireside chat in terms of sharing our knowledge. Okay. And sharing our knowledge. And so one of the things that we wanted to share with you today was in the governance structure. How does the U.S. govern cybersecurity versus how the EU governs cybersecurity? It's actually very different frameworks. But what we did while we were talking, we realized there are so many common denominators. There are common problems, right, in the United States as well as in the EU. We have common goals in cybersecurity in the EU and the United States. But we approach it from a different perspective, a different angle, and a different governance model. So I thought that we might want to talk about that today, because some folks may not be aware that they're actually very different frameworks. And then there's also some commonality as well as we look at attribution and proportionality and how should you respond based upon that attribution determination. So with that, we're going to have a fireside chat, meaning that I'm going to be asking Annita some questions and she'll throw the questions back at me. It's supposed to be conversational, and hopefully that's helpful for you as well as you listen to our presentation. So with that, Annita, if we could just start with coming from your perspective from being on the Cybersecurity Governance Board for the EU, can you tell me a little bit about the history of how that came about and then how you began part of it?
Yes, sure, because to understand European Union cybersecurity, we must dive in. And telling it shortly, European Union started to work on cybersecurity in 2013 with the first EU cybersecurity. I must say before that the European Union is an international regional organization composed by 27 member states. And what is very interesting is that the EU laws are compulsory for member states. So member states have to follow which are the regulation and the directives adopted by the European legislator. This is very important also in order to invest in European Union, just to understand this aspect. And actually in the 27 member states, we were obliged to adopt a national cybersecurity strategy, because this was first adopted by the European Union. And this is adopted by the European Council for European Union together with the European Parliament. And then all these aspects are controlled and applied by the European Agency for Cybersecurity, that is called with the acronym ENISA. So ENISA has to check in a sort of working progress which are the major surfaces of attack and which is the threat landscape, in order to understand which are the solutions, the legal solution and operational and organizational one that has to be arranged by the member states. And so we're doing in ENISA a great job. But it's worth a bit because digital security is absolutely important. And I wonder which is the situation in the United States, because in Europe we follow very carefully what you are doing in the United States and in North America generally, also Canada, to understand the best practice and also the lesson learned.
Right. Thank you for that. So what you heard from Annita is that they made it mandatory or compelling or required, in terms of making people do certain things, and that's what they're attempting to do. In the United States, we're a little bit of a rebel streak in us in terms of our history of our country, and we'd like to do things our own way. And so the way that the United States is structured through its 50 states, she has 27 member states, but those are really countries. In the United States, as you know, we have 50 states that make up one country, and those 50 states very much want to have their own say, and that was the way the Constitution came together with the United States of America. So the United States was coming together. So a lot of the states don't want to be dictated to. They want to be able to manage their own. And companies want to manage their own, right? In the United States, it's very much a capitalist society, democratic society. We want to, make it or break it ourselves. We don't want to be told what to do. So the United States has had some difficulty, as you can imagine, in doing compelling cybersecurity mandates. They've made an effort to make it more voluntary and say, hey, come together. You'll be stronger if you do these extra things. That has not been happening at the rate for which we need it to be in the area of cybersecurity. So the United States is now looking at more mandating certain cybersecurity requirements for publicly traded companies. So that's very different. So we're now in the middle of transitioning. We would like to think of ourselves as the Wild West and really each company for themselves. But now we're looking more at the European model in terms of mandating certain requirements, because we realize now economic security, national security really rests on a strong common denominator of cybersecurity across all infrastructure sectors, as well as across industry, government, and academia, as well as across all business areas as well. So it's a different landscape that we're looking at now in terms of the transition from voluntary to mandated. And I think we can definitely learn from the history and the approach from the EU. So I wanted to ask you, Annita, why does voluntary not work? Like, why did they move to the mandated model, do you think?
Well, if we leave something to voluntary, especially in Italy where I come from, nobody will do that, obviously. And we decided, European Union decided to make it compulsory because European Union wanted to reach, for the digital market, high, secure, and effective and efficient level of cybersecurity among the 27 member states. Effectiveness, if I can give keywords to United States, is effectiveness. Because if we just want to grant a high level in the 27 member states, we will never reach it on only writing on papers or writing on legal norms. And actually, we're passing from the directive NIST, that is Network Information Security 1, to the second edition that will be compulsory in the next year, with very specific requirements to all the companies and also public entities that are inside the cybersecurity perimeter. And it's not only a matter of size cap of the companies, but it's because I was dealing with the topics. Like now we have space inside, we have food and agriculture, we have manufacturing, we have water, waste and water plant. We have also chemistry and the whole health sector. So these are considered to be very dedicated sectors. And we care a lot about supply chain, because one of the problems that we all know sitting here is the supply chain problem. And because sometimes if we consider a big company like a big fish, and the one who's working with a big company like the small fish, criminal hackers, what they do? They poison the small fish in order that the big fish is poisoned too. So I think this is very interesting. And we, before the directive NIS 1, there was a lot of discretionary powers from member states to decide which kind of vigilance ex ante, that it is before the accident, and ex post after the accident to be done, or the cyber attack. Well, now the national authorities has absolutely to show that they adopted a cybersecurity preventive policy. And the question we pose in European Union is not only how secure we are, but the question is how resilient we are. This is the starting point. But I would like to know from you, what about the threat landscape? Because I'm very curious. I often read about USA, but being here it's best to ask in person.
So as we know, the threat landscape is definitely evolving. We call it, it's increasing in velocity and complexity every single day in terms of the threat that are coming towards us, and they go against all elements, right? Within the private sector, within the government sector, in the defense sector, which is part of the government, as well as industry, especially intellectual property. We even saw Alaska. Do people know where Alaska is? You know, it's pretty far remote. There was a cyber attack on the local library in Alaska. That just seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? Like, why would you want to do that in Alaska in a local library? And the reason why they called that out was because, talking about being resilient, as Annita mentioned, your cybersecurity has to be resilient. The way that they were resilient is they went back to the old paper card indexes where you would check out a book. So that was just pretty interesting. Like, it's just such a different paradigm in terms of how they, you know, really came together. So in the digital market and in terms of the United States has an interest in ensuring that our economy is secure, as well as the basic services that are provided to its citizens. So I could just bring one example out, which is what happened with water. So we all need water, right? As human beings, we all need to have something but fresh water that, you know, to replenish our bodies. So we saw that there was a cyber attack on an industrial agricultural center in the Middle East. We read about it. We actually were looking at it in terms of, okay, could that happen here? We said, oh, we should start watching for that in the United States. Within a few months, sure enough, there was the first successful cybersecurity attack against a water treatment center, a supply center for a local community down in Florida, which is, you know, the south of the United States by the water. It was in Oldsmar, Florida. It was a water treatment plant that somebody was able to remote access in because of COVID, and they were able to change the level of lime in the water levels that was going to be sent out to, you know, all the local population. The chemical that they changed within in the system remotely was a very corrosive chemical. It's what you would use to clean your sink, really scrub down really, really well. It could actually, it would burn through your intestines if you had it to too high of a level. The fact that happened really did set the United States onto a new view to saying, okay, this actually is a change that we need to do and take a look at, because we have an obligation to our citizens, to our residents, to ensure that they're safe in their home and as they proceed throughout their day. So that's where things started to look at in terms of, do we need to mandate more regular cybersecurity updates, mandate sanitization, ensure that there's proper connections between the operational technology and when those particular devices connect maybe to the internet through the IoT for upgrades. Are they now exposing a new threat, a new potential opportunity or vulnerability for those cyber attack to be successful? So the whole dynamic of a local library and a water treatment plant being impacted was really kind of alarming, I think, to the regular American, by saying, oh my gosh, like, this is not just a company over, a foreign adversary attempting to steal intellectual property. This is much more on a very basic level of, daily security in your lives. So in that area, we've seen a change in terms of people's reactions and just general awareness. Okay, this is real, something we have to do about it. So what about you?
Well, 2 weeks ago, the ENISA published the European Union Threat Landscape 2023, and it was quite very interesting. Because first we noticed an increase of ransomware, but ransomware is being complicated now. Mm-hmm. It means a double extortion, and then we have also that it started with a ransomware. There is also attacks going ahead for almost 10 days, 2 weeks. And as in Italy especially, we are good payers and we pay ransomware. I think the United States too. I mean, I don't know, I speak about Italy. And this is a big problem also. And sometimes it hides a wiper malware. So it's not really a ransomware in itself. So it's a very sophisticated attack. Then we have a problem because actually in the Europe continent, we have a war. And this war is bringing actually that the geopolitical situation is very fluid, and that we in Europe, we are targets of many, many attacks And we're starting to consider them not only as a single attack by themselves against the healthcare, against public entities, against companies, or like stealing intellectual properties, commercial, civil, but also military one. If we think about the NATO doctrine of 2018, we are thinking of a sort of theory of the accumulation of effects. I mean, if we consider together all these sort of attacks, we're not trying to figure out that we are in a hybrid war. That means that cybersecurity and cyber attacks can be part of a wider design, a wider project that some states, hostile states, are conducting together with damaging or endangering our food security, our energetic security, and also our cyber security. Then we also notice that there is a professionalization of cyber criminals. They have a business plan like companies with platform as a service for all the activities. They have also a front desk. They work 24 hours 7, and they have also their financial instruments. And so this is also a big problem because we have to understand also to fight them. After this, we have a Trojanizing of very well-known software packages. And this means also that this sort of attack are state-sponsored. So we don't have to see only the problem of the small cyber gang, small into brackets. But we have also to think that there are states behind. And the other aspect is also that many states, hostile state, or cyber gang, they consider cyber force and cyber attack as a multiplier of force. I just want to remind to myself that also from an intelligence point of view, the war in Ukraine started with a cyber attack against the Viasat satellite just a few hours before the start of the special operations. So we read it differently. And last, if I may add, one thing was very worrying for us is that last July and September 2022, Albania was attacked by 480 Iranian ITP. And Albania government has just ended the digitalization of most of the activities, government activities, that these attacks started. I wonder about this attack because I was writing it for the Ministry of Defense, why Iran should attack Albania. Albania is hosting 3,000 Iranian dissidents that they wanted to organize a festival for Iran free. So this was a warning. It means that we sitting here, we know that cyberspace has no boundaries. But sometimes we think that the cyber attacks are only limited in a geographical area, while this Albanian attack demonstrates that it's absolutely not, and that it's important to work all like-minded states together. If I may ask you now, we talk about the problems and the landscape, which is I study the US strategy, but how do you combine, the DoD cyber strategy with the White House strategy? Because for us in Europe, it's very complex to have different strategies.
We like things complicated, I guess, in the United States, make it difficult. Before I jump in there, I was just thinking about what you were saying in terms of the cyber criminals. And if you think back to it, in the old days where you could hijack a plane or kidnap an individual, it was easy to do. Not a lot of planning had to be associated with it, not a large investment of time, but you could get high reward at the end. So the cyber criminals today are now very much similar, right? Sometimes they're very, very sophisticated, long range plan, a whole strategy, well funded, or you could have the lower level cyber criminals that really just want to cause disruption and fear. So it's kind of interesting in terms of how the criminal justice aspect applies to cybersecurity in a very real way. And that's how cyber psychology comes together. So in terms of things we talked about, the threat landscape, and then you wanted to turn to solutions and the governance model. So the way that the United States approaches it is, and the Department of Defense versus the entire U.S. government perspective, there is a White House, people may be aware of it, they may not be aware of it. There was a commission report that came out, the Solarium Space Commission report that came out a couple of years ago, actually right during COVID, I believe in the summer of 2020, and it recommended that the United States start within the White House, the Office of the National Cyber Director. Say, we want one person in charge. Well, you can imagine how hard it is to have one person in charge. So the first National Cyber Director within the White House was my old boss, Mr. Christopher Inglis. So he served as the first White House Cyber Director. They put out a White House strategy not that long ago, and at the same time, nested and kind of like followed underneath that, the Department of Defense put out a cyber strategy. They really were consistent with each other. And what the Department of Defense was saying is that they're going to be looking at nation states in terms of those adversaries and how those nation states would be impacting the defense sector, which we often call the defense industrial base, as well as what we heard from Annita saying, the little fish and the big fish, the supply chain for the defense sector. The Defense Department was looking at that when they put out their defense cybersecurity strategy. But the White House, in terms of the national harmonization of cyber approaches, was saying we really need to start thinking more holistically, even though we'd like to have the state of California, the state of New York, the state of Florida, and they all like to do their own things and have their own politics. They're saying, no, we need to actually come together and think about this holistically in terms of how we should move forward. So the last thing that just came out this year was, that's going into effect in December of this year, just in a few weeks from now, the Security Exchange Commission that regulates public companies put out a mandate now for certain cybersecurity regulations in terms of disclosures of when they had a significant or potentially significant attack or breach of their systems. So now they're trying to mandate through our financial sector, when you have an open, a public company, to have more mandates in that regard. So it's a little bit different in terms of how the United States has kind of navigated this to start putting in regulations, because we heard in the beginning the EU went obviously from voluntary to mandated requirements. The US is just starting to trickle up into that area. So the big thing that you should probably looking for if you're interested is how the Security Exchange Commission is interpreting the requirements that the White House is putting out for merely, we all have to pay attention to this. We've seen, threats on the energy with the gas supply, the supply chain with the grocery stores. I mean, like I was saying, with the water area, telecommunications, the railroads. I mean, there's like no area that has not been impacted by some way by cybersecurity. So they really are hoping that the national strategy with the defense strategy can harmonize some of the regulations. But there's a feisty group, in the United States that doesn't like to always, follow one person's order. So we'll see how that comes down, and we'll be following what the EU is doing with their 27 member states. So back to you. If you could wrap it up in terms of where do you think the solution space is, so that when we're looking at the international forums and the legal forums and the governance structures, where are there opportunities that we could come together as countries coming together and continents coming together to look at this more holistically to make a difference?
Yes, to come together. I mean, law enforcement agencies should come together. We read sometimes of like the JANOSEK operation. It was conducted by FBA, by Interpol, by Europol, and by 18 national police, just to close down this market on the dark web. But I want to, in the few minutes I still have to speak, I just want to explain which is the organization of the European Union cybersecurity. I mean, in the various directives and regulations that were adopted, there are sectorial. Some are for critical entities, other for critical infrastructure like energetic sector or supply, oil supply or gas supply, or others for companies. Every state has to adopt a cybersecurity strategy, to adopt a contact point that can be in contact with the European Commission and with experts of the other states. Every state has to oblige companies and public sector to adopt a risk assessment, vulnerability disclosure, a risk management, and also an incident report with a precise timetable that is 24 hours after the knowledge of an incident. After 72 hours, the companies or the public entities has to give an intermediate report, and after 1 month to give another complete report of what has happened. In case it is not be done, as we don't like voluntary, there are sanctions to be applied. The sanctions are for important entities. It's like 10 million euros. Otherwise, 2% of the total income of the companies, or otherwise it's a smaller company, it's 7 million and 1.4% of the total revenue for the last year. So in this case, it could be not only in case of a cyber incident, the problem would be for a company not only to have problems with the customs, with the clients, and also with the ransomware or the other sort of attack that has been launched against it, but also the sanctioning by the states. So voluntary, we don't like voluntary. And I tell you, this is the only way really to have this efficient and effective cybersecurity. I don't know if we are on time now. I wonder, yes, 2 minutes left.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess I could close up if that's good for you, Annita. So I guess in closing, what we're learning is that sometimes you have to move to the mandated side. However, it's not always accepted as much as we know. And we learned earlier in a session that we did this morning on digital education and cyber education and getting more momentum and gravity behind, the value of cyber education across multiple levels in terms of all ages and sectors. We realize that it's when you mandate something, it makes it less fun. It sounded like, oh, you have to do it. And so when you have all these mandates, it's like it kind of quashes sometimes the innovative spirit. And we need so much innovation, right? We need to really, everyone here doesn't mind change, right? You like change, you thrive in change, you like to see the technology keep moving forward, you want to be able to be collaborative and curious and keep pushing things forward. So it's really hard to have mandates when you want to be innovative. You're like, well, how the heck do you balance that? So when you also want, from a country's perspective or a continent's perspective, you want to make sure that you're positioning your country to prosper, right? To be, to have a high level of prosperity in a particular, by a country in a particular sector, particularly in cybersecurity and telecommunications. So at all times, we're trying to balance mandates with innovation. And I think that's what makes a challenge as well in terms of this space. So I really appreciate that we both were able to come together from, literally across the opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. And hopefully you found this somewhat valuable in terms of understanding the different perspectives in how our governance models work. But we do have common objectives and common goals. And the biggest solution, obviously, to this space is you, every single person here in this room, and your commitment to kind of work together and to collaborate and find common solutions for common goals. So thank you, everyone. I want to thank the FIC for having us today.